All right. So I'm going to ask you something I want to know, and I know you kind of stirred up the internet a little bit with this. Is it hereditary? Is it nature, nurture? Give me the facts, doctor.
Yeah, I want to preface this by saying I was miseducated and misinformed in my own degree programs, and all my research that I did, including some of the research in my dissertation, I'll admit, was wrong because I was taught wrong about these disorders.
There you go.
So good science is about upsetting the status quo. Sometimes you have to get a little upset when you realize the truth. So there's a lot of people who get defensive about this. Like, how could you say it's people are born this way? It's nurture. It's been proven. Here's the problem. All of the data that show it's nurture only, has nothing to do with nature, is called anecdotal data. What that means is stories were told in therapy, and then interpretations were made by therapists about those stories. Now we have brain scans. Now we have neuroimaging technology. So back then, there was no way to know, you just took people at face value. The problem is narcissists, borderlines, there's a couple other in that category, histrionics, antisocial, the psychopath. They notoriously lie pathologically. So all the data was taking them at face value. And everybody knows that when you go to therapy, you talk about your childhood.
Right.
That's just what people know that to do. That's the first thing. Even people who don't know much about therapy, they know that people talk about their childhoods in therapy.
Right.
Right?
Right.
Well, of course, narcissistic people know that. So when they talk about how their lives are unmanageable because of the chaos that's been brewed up, and the therapist says, tell me about your upbringing, they're going to be like, oh, well, yeah. I mean, I had a terrible upbringing. That's why I do what I do. Once we started doing research where we could scan brains and all that kind of stuff, the empirical evidence that this is nurture really does go out the window. That's not to say that there's not an influence. There's always a social and environmental influence, but the predisposition is already there. So one myth about child abuse, for example, is that people who are abused in childhood grow up to be abusers. 80% of people abused in childhood do not grow up to be abusers in adulthood. So the most empirical research, we're talking about clinical research, we're not talking about stories told, shows that the genetic influence is much more prominent than people originally
What percentage
suspected.
is that? What is that?
I mean,
is that 60,
well, that's
70,
another thing.
Do you know, or?
Yeah, we have 10 personality disorders, by the way. So these aren't just for narcissists, but a lot of people. So across the board, each one, has a different percentage. But there are studies that show that narcissistic personality disorder is like 77 to 80% heritable. Mm-hmm. And this is going off of, again, empirical data. So it's going off brain scans. It's going off where you see deficiencies or deficits in certain areas of the brain that make traits